Labor stoppages and strikes can absolutely suck for a lot of people. I think that goes without saying, but when you have a strike, there are a lot of consequences that come of that, especially when you're a player. It's a time of great uncertainty. You don't know what your work environment is going to look like when the strike is over. You don't know when the strike ends, what the relationship is going to be like between the players and upper management, and whether there's going to be hostility and tension in the air or not. You don't know when the strike is going to end, so you're just in limbo, waiting to get the call that you're going back to work and everything is good to go again. You don't know when your next paycheck is coming, and you don't know how much longer you can realistically survive off of the funds you've got right now. In other words, labor stoppages and strikes can cause a ton of confusion and a ton of uncertainty. And perhaps no player in NFL history suffered that more than this man right here. This is safety WK Hicks, who played for the Houston Oilers before the NFL-AFL merger, but in 1970, as you'll soon find out, found himself on the New York Jets. I did a video a while ago about Cleveland Browns wide receiver Homer Jones after he was acquired by the team from the New York Giants, and what happened to him during the strike the same year in 1970, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And unlike what happened with Homer Jones, while this did not derail the career of WK Hicks in any way whatsoever, it might be even more bizarre and more confusing, and might be the biggest waste of gas and the biggest waste of time in human history. Because let's just say that the second part of the career of WK Hicks, as in his tenure with the New York Jets, got off to about the worst start possible and most confusing start possible that more than half a century later deserves a deep dive today. Because this is the story behind WK Hicks and one of the craziest instances of a player striking in the history of the National Football League. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you probably not heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff and want to learn more and join this community, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing and for helping the channel out. And with that in mind, let's talk about the time that Wilmer Kenzie Hicks, WKH, was thinking to himself, WTH. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and just how bizarre it was, we need some context to understand just who this man right here that you've been watching this entire time, WK Hicks, is, and how good of a player he was before being acquired by the Jets and having everything go completely haywire. There were a lot of very good defensive backs across the history of the American Football League in the 1960s, and WK Hicks might have been up there with the best of the bunch. The man was a Texas resident through and through. He was born right on the border of Texas in Texarkana, went to high school in Texas, went to college at Texas Southern, and after going undrafted, played in the AFL with the Houston Oilers. This will become important later on. The man called Texas his home and would spend time in Texas whenever he could, even if his employer was in a different state. This wasn't an issue in the 1960s when he was with the Oilers, but you'll see how this could become an issue in just a little bit. Anyways, when it came to his time with the Oilers, he was a very good cornerback. In 1965, he led the entire AFL with 9 interceptions, receiving AP second-team All-Pro honors. There weren't a lot of bright spots for the Oilers that season, as they went 4-10 with the worst defense in the league. But that two-headed monster in the secondary with WK Hicks and Jim Norton was one of them. And for an encore in 1966, Hicks made it to the first and only All-Star game of his career. Over his 6 seasons with the Oilers, Hicks recorded 27 interceptions and had at least 3 interceptions in every season. He was super consistent. For some perspective, by the time his time with the Oilers was up, he was 3rd in franchise history in career interceptions, only behind the aforementioned Jim Norton and Fred Glick. And to this day, Hicks still ranks 4th all-time in interceptions. It really is crazy how the Oilers and Titans franchise has only had one player surpass Hicks since the merger, with that being Chris Dishman. But that's how good Hicks was. For an undrafted free agent, that's a heck of a career, and he was showing no signs of slowing down by the merger, as in 1969, he was an anchor on one of the best secondaries in football, which was so good that it produced 3 All-Stars. However, in 1970, the Oilers decided to trade their star cornerback for years to the New York Jets in exchange for a 5th-round pick. Oddly enough, that pick turned out to be pretty solid, as the Oilers drafted offensive lineman Ron Saul with it, and he played 12 seasons in the NFL and was an anchor on Washington's offensive line during the latter half of the 1970s and the early 1980s. So the Oilers at least drafted a capable player after trading away Hicks. Why the Oilers made the trade, seeing as they hadn't drafted a defensive back yet by that point, and seeing as Hicks was still in his 20s, I'm not entirely sure. But we do know that owner Bud Adams was furious about the team's embarrassing loss in the playoffs in 1969 to the Oakland Raiders, and wanted to make some changes. So this was definitely one of them. Either way, the Jets were going to get a guy who, at least on paper, seemed like a heck of a player, and would be a much-needed boost to their pass defense. The Jets have the 3rd worst pass defense in the AFL the year before, and the top guy in that secondary, according to most, Bill Baird, announced his retirement, with another starter, cornerback Randy Beverly, on the trading block. So the move made a ton of sense for the Jets. Just like that, Hicks was a Jet, going from one American Football League team to another as the merger took effect. So now that Hicks is on this team right here, you would think that his first order of business once the new league year started and once training camp began would be to start practicing with the team and going from his home in Texas up to New York to join his new squad, get acquainted with the defense and the coaching staff, and get into shape for the upcoming season. And sure enough, that's exactly what Hicks did, as in the middle of July, he made the long trek. Hicks brought everything with him. It's not as if he flew from Houston to New York to join the team, especially since back in 1970, flying was still viewed as a luxury that most Americans didn't really do to get from one place to another. He took whatever car he was driving and went down whatever roads it takes to go from Houston to where the Jets practiced, which in this case was Hofstra University. In other words, this was not as though Hicks lived 1 hour away and this was a relatively easy commute. This was a commute that was over 1,660 miles. For some perspective, that's more than 3 times the distance that the Proclaimers would initially walk, and that's more than 1.5 times the distance that Vanessa Carlton would walk. This is not a trip that you can make in a day. This is a trip that takes quite a few days. Even if you go non-stop, assuming you hit no traffic whatsoever and stay at no motels along the way and never stop for gas, it's going to take more than a day to get from Houston to New York. Being super aggressive, at minimum, this is still a 3-day trip that takes up a lot of mileage, a lot of gas, a lot of exhaustion on the body from non-stop driving, and a lot of wear and tear on the car. But you've got to do what you got to do. So Hicks made it to New York on time, and after making the journey of roughly 1,700 miles, he thought that he would be able to step on the practice field and get going. Except, he wasn't. Because after driving 1,700 miles, he was told to immediately turn back around. All that driving that you did, all for nothing. Because as it turns out, the NFL players were on strike. I'm not going to dive too much into the details of the strike and what they were striking for. But long story short, the players wanted increased minimum salaries and more benefits from a medical standpoint. And while the players were on strike, obviously, everything was halted. No one was practicing, no one was in the team facility, and no one was doing anything, with no one knowing when this strike would come to an end. And amazingly enough, Hicks had no idea that the players were on strike. He was completely oblivious to it all. Somehow, no one told him that the players were striking and that nothing was going to be happening. Somehow, he didn't pick up a newspaper and see that the players were on strike, because it's not like this story came out of nowhere. Somehow, none of his friends down in Texas, which I presume he had a lot of, seeing as he lived there his whole life, let him know about the strike. Not one of his teammates, current or former, talked with him about the strike. He just went about his business as usual and was completely oblivious to the outside world, as even though the strike started right around the 4th of July, Hicks was on the road and was driving up to New York well after that, getting to the facility on July 14th. So you can imagine the surprise when head coach Weeb Ewbank saw this man he'd been watching this whole time at the facility. Ewbank, in no uncertain terms, told him to turn around and get out, because he wasn't allowed to be here while the strike was happening. There's no reason for you to be in New York right now. As Ewbank said to Hicks, "I don't know what to tell you. I would think you should collect expenses from the Players Association." The Jets weren't going to pay his expenses for traveling up here all for nothing. The Jets weren't going to pay his expenses while he waited for a resolution. Even if Hicks probably should have had some understanding of what was happening, the NFLPA somehow forgot to let their own player know that there was a strike, which led to the most wasted car ride ever. Which meant that after driving 1,700 miles from Houston to New York, he immediately had to make the turn back to Houston, and then go back up to New York again once the strike finally came to an end, whenever that happened. A 1,700-mile trip, due to poor communication, became 5,100 miles, and Hicks spent most of his summer not getting into good shape, but rather just driving around. Said Hicks on the whole situation, "This strike caught me by surprise. I could have stayed back in Texas and caught me some more sunshine and got myself into better shape." And yeah, it's hard to argue with that. Would you rather stay where you are, be productive with your life, and then only go to your place of employment when you have to? Or drive for days across the country, be told that you're not allowed to be at work yet because there's a strike going on, and then have to drive back, wasting days and days of your life on a meaningless endeavor? Because I know which one I'm picking, and I know which one most of you are picking. As someone who gets annoyed when something doesn't start on time, and I think of all the things I could have been doing with that time I'm wasting, I can't even imagine how Hicks felt during all of this. Maybe not the biggest deal if he was already in New York, but being across the country and doing this? Yeah, I'd be ticked off. Fortunately for all parties involved, the strike eventually ended in early August, and Hicks was back with the Jets at their facility, this time for real, along with the other players. And to be fair to Hicks and the Jets, the trade worked out pretty well for them. The Jets had no prior success in the 5th round before. Their 5th round pick from 1969, running back Chris Gilbert, never played a down in pro football, nor did their 5th round pick from 1968 in linebacker Lee Jacobson, nor did their 5th round pick from 1967 in defensive back Louis Jackson, nor did their 5th round pick from 1965 in defensive end Glenn Sasser. In fact, never in franchise history, not once, did the Jets have a 5th round pick that wound up playing a single snap for the team. So trading away a 5th rounder for WK Hicks was a super low risk move and a guaranteed win considering their prior history. But Hicks played very well once he was finally able to play for the Jets. In 1970, he led the Jets with 8 interceptions, finishing 3rd in the entire NFL in that category, only behind Johnny Robinson of the Kansas City Chiefs and Dick LeBeau of the Detroit Lions. When the only 2 guys ahead of you in that category are Hall of Famers, that's not bad company to be in. Hicks even had a multi-interception game against the Minnesota Vikings in a stunning upset win where the Vikings, despite being huge 11-point favorites, lost 20-10 in one of their only 2 losses during the regular season. Hicks played 3 seasons in New York, finishing his Jets tenure with 13 interceptions before being cut before the start of the 1973 season and never playing again. As a side note, I love how despite how great Hicks was, finishing his career with 40 interceptions and having quality moments with both the Oilers before the trade and the Jets after the trade, that his Wikipedia page is literally 2 sentences long. There's nothing on the guy whatsoever, even though not only was he a great player, but he had one of the craziest encounters by any player during a labor stoppage that you're going to see in your life. So as a note to every labor union watching this video, if you're going on strike, make sure to let people know that you're going on strike, especially if these people usually cross state lines to go to work. If you have an employee in Texas that needs to work in New York, you go on strike, and you never tell that employee that they're on strike, so the employee drives or flies all the way across the country, only to be told to go back and waste their time and money, it's not going to be a pretty sight. I know that much. WK Hicks had a very bizarre start to his time with the Jets. And while it worked out in the end, to say that this beginning was rocky would be putting it lightly. Because when it came to WK Hicks and the strike, his first impression was that he never got the impression. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.